Hello everybody, I hope you're all fine. Vietnam, what happened in May? The index continued its winning streak for another month, bringing strong gains to our fund. The AFC Vietnam Fund was up plus 6.2%, and this was mainly due to banking stocks which had a phenomenal run. The latest wave of COVID-19 infections still seems to be well contained, with daily numbers reaching 100 to 300 cases. Fast-acting government actions, such as the recently announced social distancing rule in Ho Chi Minh, do not lead us to see changes to the economic forecast for this year. Hi, my name is Andreas Vogelsanger. I'm the CEO of the AFC Vietnam Fund.
Despite renewed foreign selling throughout the months, the index actually continued its way up to new highs, beating most other markets around the globe. One of the likely reasons for this negligence is probably the assumption that emerging markets could see a weaker or slower economic recovery, as many Asian countries are pretty much closed for travel and are behind vaccination rates compared to the Western world. Certainly, the new COVID-19 wave in many Asian countries did not help to stir confidence. But looking at Vietnam, with 100 to 300 new daily cases of new infections, it's actually not such a big number in comparison to population of almost 100 million people in Vietnam. As Vietnam is just a tiny financial market within the Asian emerging markets and frontier universe, people are simply not differentiating, and just if they're negative on Asian emerging markets, they just sell everything rather than to have a closer look. And by any economic comparison measured both from the crisis year 2020 as well as the outlook for 2021, Vietnam is ranked in the top countries in the world. If you look at this chart, obviously, it's well reflected also in the performance of the stock index, with Vietnam performing the best with the black line. And if you look at China, the Shanghai Composite Index, which lagged significantly this year. Europe, the Euro Stoxx 50 index performed better than the US S&P 500. But all three indices are clearly trailing the Vietnam HSX or the Vietnam Ho Chi Minh Index so far in 2021. But let's have a look at the 5-year chart. So more importantly, our bullish long-term stance on Vietnam is also bearing fruits, as can be seen in this chart, in the longer chart of a 5-year period. Very interestingly, Vietnam has even beaten the US market, while China and Europe showed surprisingly high correlation. That's obviously the orange, and the red line below are China and Europe. If you look at Vietnam, obviously the Consumer Confidence Index is an interesting index to have a look around the globe, and in Vietnam it simply ranks consistently much higher than the global average. And obviously people in Vietnam are very positive about their future. And together with stronger demand for products made in Vietnam, this is certainly a backbone of continued strong economic development. But let's look at inflation also, a threat for the world. It's a very good question. I mean, it was written a lot about it recently in all the financial press about renewed inflation fears which came up, and the fear that central banks around the world would ignore it for too long altogether. But while the ghost inflation has been painted on the wall too many times over the past 20 years, the current period can hardly be compared to any other in the past 40 years. Most central bankers still speak of temporary inflation, which will subsidize in the near future without the need to raise interest rate soon or by much. But obviously, this is quite debatable, and we need to have a closer look. The fact is that 40 years when the inflation phase of the 70s was overcome, inflation had only a brief moment in 2008. And while interest rates have known only one way over the 3 years, which is down. But yeah, if you look at various statistics, inflation statistic and all that, the inflation calculation method has changed a few times since 1980 to adjust for technological advances and changes in spending habits around the globe. It is certainly true that prices for computers, TVs, communication prices, etc. have fallen, but nobody would buy a 5-year-old computer or TV, not to speak of an iPhone 7, for example. So, yeah, as I said, inflation is something to have a look at it. But also, as I mentioned, you know, the interest rates only have seen one way, and that's basically down. As can be seen from the 10-year US Treasury bond on this chart, from 1962 until today, the debt level over that period, or the debt level today is 3 times higher actually than it was in the 1960s, when interest rates were much higher than today. And therefore servicing that debt burden was much harder. But obviously, yes, obviously recently with the fight against the pandemic, obviously debt has accelerated, as we have written in our other reports. Since we do not expect central banks to commit financial suicide and also push a good percentage of their population over the financial cliff into bankruptcy, the most likely outcome is a continuation of negative real interest rates, and hoping that many of the current inflationary signs are really only temporary and will subside as worldwide production and shipments start normalizing again. So let's have a look at Vietnam and its inflation since April 2013 up to April 2021. You see this chart here. But unlike most parts of the world, emerging economies like Vietnam have more recent experience with inflation. During the bubble in 2008, inflation peaked at a staggering 28% in Vietnam. And only in recent years, Vietnam and other emerging markets show quite acceptable level of inflation. The recent rise can be seen so far as normalization of the 5-year average after the brief negative value last year. And anything up to 4% is not a cause of concern for us in Vietnam. So we are below 3% currently, but inflation seems to be well under control in Vietnam, and we are not too scared about it. So interest rates, the US and Vietnam 10-year government bond yields in comparison. So the red line is the US 10-year Treasury, and the blue line is the 10-year Vietnam government yield. So we can see, obviously, also in Vietnam, interest rates came down from a much higher level, arguably, but they came down significantly. And also the spread of Vietnam over US rates is the bright blue line, which you can see here on this chart. So what does it mean for us now? So obviously, even though we are not too worried about inflation and interest rates in Vietnam at the moment, we do analyze our portfolio very thoroughly, continuously, of course, but and recently also with in mind that potentially inflation could become a topic, and we made quite some adjustments. Also, we do certainly not make a serious bet on inflation, because, as I said, we are not too scared about it. But in our investment process, we already look out for financially sound companies, and we simply want to reduce sector risks and find new ones or increase current positions where we see positive developments in the current environment. So when I mean reduce sector risks, is certain sectors obviously could have a negative impact if inflation really would become a topic. And one of these examples which we looked at is, for example, Putai, which is PTB, sorry, which is one of the largest furniture exporters in Vietnam. And the fact that demand for furniture in the US surged significantly during COVID-19 period, and the trade war between China and the US really helped Vietnam's furniture exporters significantly, and PTB really had a fantastic year. If you look at the net profits here over the last few years, of course, the 2020 COVID year saw a slight hit in the revenues, but nevertheless it was still quite strong. And in 2021, the forecast is that we have a significant increase in the revenues once again. And Vietnam actually has overtaken China as the largest exporter of finished goods, furnitures basically. It was written in one of the big newspapers called Furniture Today in the US. So, yeah, when looking at the chart, we actually think that even though the stock of PTB had a fantastic performance over recent times, but if you look at the technical or fundamental values, it's still undervalued. If you look at the PER of 10 times, a forward PER of 7.9 times, with estimated earnings growth for the next 5 years of around 20% per annum, we actually think PTB still looks very, very attractive. And as I mentioned, Vietnam has overtaken China as the largest largest furniture exporters to the US, higher than China now. They actually had a phenomenal run also. If you look at what Vietnam has leapfrogged several major trading partners in Europe and Asia in recent years, and is now the 6th largest source of US imports in general. So this is not just looking at furniture, this is just looking at exporters to the US. And it has overtaken these big countries such as South Korea or India, Italy, UK, France. So it has an incredible run recently in terms of furniture exporters and other exporters, of course. So yeah, you see two pictures of summer holidays. So obviously the situation in Vietnam and in Europe or the US is completely different. I mean, Europe and US are in a much better position this year, as most countries are expected to have the majority of their population vaccinated by this summer, enabling them to travel again to many parts of the world. Also still with limitations and restrictions, obviously, as we said, tourism in Asia is mostly closed for foreigners. But we think Vietnam, along with many other Asian nations, they are close, but we will experience another dull summer season this summer. But next year it could become a significant change, obviously, because numbers will be compared to 2020, which will not be fantastic, and 2021 will most likely turn out not much better than 2020. But then next year, 2021, I think we should have a very positive impact on GDP, with hopefully finally the summer seasons will be back. People will be back at the beaches again in 2021 in Vietnam. And on the left hand, you see the organized tourism of Rimini, for example, where this summer probably this will be very much happening again. And you see the unorganized tourism on the right hand side in Vung Tau. That was an old picture of 2019, but hopefully in 2021 this picture will repeat again. Thank you. This was all from me. You're going to hear again my next update in 1 month's time. Thank you and goodbye.